In this video, we're going to get our player shooting a fireball. I know it's a knight, and knights don't really shoot fireballs, but I just want to show you how to do it. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new script, and I'm just going to call it fireball. Oh, actually I'll call it player shoot. So, and then I'm just going to go into my assets, into my sprites, and I'm just going to look for a fireball of some sort. There we go. And I'm just going to drag all those fireball sprites as a single animation. I'm just going to call it fireball. And I'm going to save it inside my animations folder. So there's my fireball. I'll just press play to show you what it's doing so far. So that's what it looks like. Cool. Okay, now that that fireball's there, I'm going to give it a box collider. Actually, I'm going to give it a circle collider. And I'll drag that in so that it's the size of that peak of the fireball. Cool. And I'm also going to give it a rigid body 2D, so we can make it move and stuff. And in the rigid body 2D, the first thing I'm going to do is turn off the gravity. So I'll set the gravity scale to 0, and I'll freeze rotation in the Z position. So if I press play now, that's what it looks like. Now notice when I run and jump with my player, it can hit that fireball out of the way. So when the player and the fireball collides, or when anything with a rigid body collides with this fireball, it's going to affect it. So to prevent that from happening, we are going to go to our circle collider, and there's an option there for is trigger. So I'm just going to tick that, which means now when they collide, it'll register that the player's hitting it, but it won't be affected by the player's momentum or anything like that. I'm now going to go back to my script, and I'm going to add the player shoot to my player. Where are you? There we go. And I'm going to create another script and call it bullet. And I'm going to add that to the fireball. There we go. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up that player shoot script. And the script for this will be nice and straightforward. In the start, I'm just going to say if something. If you don't know what an if statement is, watch the video on if statements. And I'm going to check the input. Get button down. And the button that I want to check, so if you don't know what the input is doing, watch the video on inputs. But get button down just does this. So in Unity, if you go to edit and look at your project settings, there's a input manager, and you can see it in the inspector, and a whole bunch of keyboard buttons and joystick controls and mouse controls are mapped to these functions. So note you have one here called Fire 1, and Fire 1 will just be the default button for shooting. Right, so you can see it here. Fire 1 is mouse 0 or the positive button Z. Now I changed this to Z myself manually. Most of you will have this as left control, but I'm saying mouse 0, which is your left click. And I can also check fire1 down here, so spelt the exact same way, and that's because this fire1 is mapped to the keyboard or the mouse, and this fire1 is mapped to the joystick. Right, joystick button 0. But all we need to remember is this name here, so it's called fire1. And I'll come in here, and inside of quotation marks, I'll write fire1, exactly how it's spelled. So all this is saying is if the user presses whatever button's mapped to fire1, I want to do something. And what do I want to do? I want to instantiate something. Like that. Now instantiate takes in 3 values, right? The first being what you want to instantiate, the second being where, and the third being its rotation. Now for its rotation, we're actually going to go back to Unity, and I have to create a empty game object here. If I right click in the hierarchy, create empty, and I can rename this to firepoint. So I'm just going to call it firepoint. And I'm going to click on firepoint and drag it into my knight. Now what that does is it makes this firepoint become the child of the knight. And I'm just going to click on firepoint again, and I'm going to click on my scale tool so you can see where it is. Actually, I'll click on my move tool. Right, so that's where it is at the moment. And the reason we're creating this firepoint is to tell it where on the player we want the bullet to spawn. So if your main player has like a gun or something like that, you'll put this, or you'll move this towards the gun. But for me, I'm just going to drag it inside the knight somewhere. Actually, I'll drag it to his mouse. So, oops. So it'll look like his breathing fire. Now, the reason we did it this way is A, we can put it exactly where we want on the player. And B, this firepoint is going to move with the player. Right, so if I press play and I move my player, notice that the move tool is still on the firepoint, but it still moves with the player. And when my player gets flipped, and remember we did the flipping by rotating the player 180 degrees in the Y direction. So when the player rotates 180 degrees in the Y direction, that firepoint also rotates 180 degrees in the Y direction. Cool. Now that that's there, I have to access the value for that firepoint, and I also have to access the bullet, right? And I'm just going to do that in the inspector by making this public. So I'll make a public game object, and I'll call it bullet, like so. And I'll also get a public, and here I want the transform of the firepoint. So I'll just call it firepoint again, like so. Now I'll go back to my instantiate, and what I want to instantiate is a bullet. And I want it to instantiate at the position of my firepoint, like that. And I want it to be rotated in the direction of my firepoint as well. So firepoint.rotation. Cool. So whenever the user presses the fire1 button, it'll instantiate a bullet at the firepoint's position and with the firepoint's rotation. So I'll stop here and I'll just test this out so far. Nothing's happening. I don't know why. Oh, because I haven't told it what bullet I want. So here I want the bullet as my game object. And I'm going to just drag that bullet into a prefab. So I created one before to test. I'll drag this one in. Oops. There we go. And I'll go back to my player. Then I'll drag this into the bullet. So it'll spawn one of those fireballs. And the fire point is just this fire point. So I'll drag that in. So it'll store the transform, and just as a reminder, the transform of any component is just this transform information. right? And the way it's stored is inside what's called a vector 3. So if you don't know what that is, go watch the video on vector 3s. It's really important. So it stores the position, the rotation, and the scale. If I press play, come back and check. Oh, I'm an idiot. So this if should have been in the update. There you go. So the bullet is spawning behind the player. Only problem now is the bullet's not going anywhere. Cool. So now let's make our bullet move, and we're going to do that by going back to our scripts, bullet, and we need to attach that to our fireball. So, oh, I've already attached it. There you go. So the bullet's there, so I'm just going to open it up. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a bunch of variables. The first being a public integer called speed, which will be the speed that the bullet is traveling. I need the bullet's rigid body, so create a rigid body 2D. I'll just call it RB. And one way I can get a component without making it public, and I've mentioned this in previous videos, but if I don't want to make this public, which means I don't want to access it from the inspector, I can come here into start, and I can say RB and set it just like a variable equals get components, like so. And then I put one of these angle brackets, and I want the component that I want, which is a rigid body 2D, followed by these brackets, right? So this will just get the rigid body 2D component of whatever this script is attached to. So this script is currently attached to the fireball. So when the fireball starts, right, it's gonna save its rigid body 2D inside this RB object. So that's the rigid body. And the way we're going to make it move is all rigid bodies have a method, like so. Actually, it's not a method, it's a property. And it's just a property with a vector2 value. And just as a reminder, a vector2 value is just an X and a Y position. Whoops. It's just an X and a Y value, right? And the velocity just tells it how far it should move every frame in the X and how far it should move every frame in the Y. So instead of Y, we don't want it to move up and down, so we'll just make that 0. And in the X, we want it to just move by our speed. Whoops. And we'll create a new vector2 like that. So if that was confusing, watch the video on vector 3s. Again, really important. So now if I come in here and click on play, I should see my fireball not move because I haven't set a speed, but I'll click on the fireball and I'll change the default speed to, let me say 10. And up here, just make sure you click apply so that it stores that value on the prefab. Remember, we're spawning the prefabs, so anything I do to this, I have to reapply to the prefab. And you can see the bullets flying, right? And now if I shoot, whoops, I can see the bullet going forward. And if I shoot, the bullet is rotating, but it's still going forward. And the way we overcome that is we have to check if this player is flipped or the fire point's flipped, it doesn't matter. Now, before I can check that, I'm just going to click on the player. And yep, make sure it has the tag of player over here. So player is one of the default tags available. So my player does have it. And I'm going to come back into here and I'm just going to create a player object, or an empty game object for my player. I'll just call it player. Actually, I'm just going to call it, actually, yeah, I'll call it player. Like so. And then inside my start, I'm going to set it to whatever has the tag of player. And I can use that by using the game object class, and the game object class has a property, has a method called find with. There we go, find with tag, like so. And the find with tag just has to take in the information of what game object it wants to find, right? So it's going to look for all the objects to see which one has the player tag, and then it's going to store that inside this empty player variable, this empty player game object that we created up here. Cool. And now all we need to do is change this speed value to its inverse if I'm flipped. So what I'm saying is, when the bullet's created, if my player is looking towards the left, so if it's going in the opposite direction, I want to make this speed value its negative value. So if speed is currently 10, I want it to be -10, right? It's currently flipped the right way. The -10 will just make it travel in the right direction as well. And to do that, I just have to check the rotation of that player. And I'll check it with an if statement. And I'll say if. Okay, now this part may be a little confusing. So if player.transform, this should be fairly straightforward to you if you're at this point. And you'd be tempted to write rotation, right? Player.transform.rotation.y. That's how we've been doing it with the position. So if I wanted its y position, I'd say player.transform.position.y. But I want its rotation. Now the problem with this is the rotation value, the transform.rotation, isn't in an actual angle. So it's not going to say like 180 degrees or 50 degrees or anything like that. The way it stores this is the way it stores this rotation value is in a number, I think, between 0 and 1, or some weird way that only computers really understand. So what we actually want to do is, instead of .rotation, we use something called local Euler angles, right? And that's just that rotation value transformed into an angle value between 0 and 360 degrees that we understand. So we're saying if it's equal to 180, right? So the double equal sign means if it's equal to. So if it's rotated in the y direction by 180 degrees, we want our speed to equal our speed times -1. So just as a reminder, variables are set by taking what's on the left and putting it what's in the right. So it'll calculate this left side first. So it'll take its speed, which is currently 10, multiplied by -1, so that'll become -10, and then store it back in speed. So it's just converting the speed to its opposite. And I'll save that. And if I'm not rotated, I don't want to do anything. So this should be working just fine. So I'll test that out. I'll hit play. Cool. And I'm shooting in the right direction. I'll go this way, and I'm shooting in the... Cool. And I can jump and shoot. It's going that way, all right. And I'll jump and shoot, and it's going that way, all right. And that's all for this video.